Hey folks, and welcome to this discussion episode, where today we will tackle the story of Transistor. As I mentioned in my review of the game's story opens itself up to a lot of interpretation and speculation, which is what we're gonna dedicate today's episode to. We'll be tackling 4 overarching areas. These will be the Camerata's end goal, the mystery surrounding the Transistor itself, the place referred to as the country, as well as the nature of Cloudbank. I'll be discussing the most widely accepted theories, as well as doing some speculation on my own, trying to find what I think is the most probable answer to the various questions. Please note though that this video assumes that you are familiar with the story, as there will be some major spoilers. And as with any game open to interpretation and speculation, anything said in this video are educated guesses at best. And so, with that out of the way, let's get cracking. In order to establish a sound foundation for the rest of the discussions, I think we should start by talking about what Cloudbank actually is. And while there are many different theories out there, one thing that everyone seems to agree on is that Cloudbank is not a real place. Instead, most people seem to be of the opinion that Cloudbank is in one way, shape or form related to computers. This has been derived from the language and the names used within the game. For example, in a post on the Giant Bomb forums, user random1233 points out the following: that both the words cloud and bank could refer to some sort of storage, that an operation going on a computer can often be referred to as a process. Also, if a process is stopped, it's often said that the process has been terminated, which is also the message that shows up after Red wins a battle against the process. There is also a massive hint within the titular weapon. Transistors were a key invention that allows us to build the computers that we use today. If the game world is indeed computer related, it would only make sense that something known as a transistor would be quite powerful, perhaps going even so far as to calling it the foundational building block. This theory is then further expanded on by Reddit user DigiXFN. They further speculate that the cradle could be the CPU. That will make it the heart of Cloudbank, controlling more or less everything, including the process. The transistor is a part of it, and when removed it can act kind of like a remote. However, after the transistor glitches out due to Red's failed assassination, control of the process is lost. In order for control to be regained, the transistor has to be returned to the cradle. In this scenario, the process are basically a program running on the computer. However, it's suffering from something akin to a memory leak, meaning that it's just going around consuming more and more memory. Once the transistor has been returned to the cradle, it can basically be used to rewrite the files damaged by the process. It should also be added that this explanation also gives us an idea of why the transistor reacts weirdly when the spine is around. The spine consumes so much memory that when the transistor tries to transmit data to the cradle, it actually lags. This would explain why the transistor and the man trapped inside it become so, well, slow whenever the spine is around. As far as I can find, the main competing theory seems to be the virtual reality theory. It's based on the same building blocks as the computer theory. However, it instead claims that the people in Cloudbank are experiencing it through some sort of virtual reality interface. Overall though, the theories have very much in common, probably more so than what separates them. Me personally, I am not completely sold on the computer theory. While it is sound and it gives a lot of insights into what could be going on, I think it fails to incorporate one of the key elements of the game: the people and their interactions. I also don't think it gives a proper explanation as to why Cloudbank is designed the way it is. And with that, I'm primarily talking about the fact that it's basically a democracy on steroids. If it is a computer, it's easy to explain how the city can change the way it does, but not why. Why do the people within it desire so many changes? And more to the point, what are the people? It could be that there are other programs, but that wouldn't explain how they can have emotional investments and relationships. To me, the character interactions seem way too organic to be the results of programming. As such, I tend to lean more towards the VR theory, primarily because it gives a more solid explanation for both the world and the characters. However, if this is indeed some sort of simulation, I'd like to speculate a little on what it is and why it was set up. So this is how I interpret Cloudbank. I believe Cloudbank is one giant social experiment. It's a virtual reality simulation designed to test what happens when a population is given more or less complete control of their surroundings. They have the means to make any modification they want, as well as a highly sophisticated system to allow the people of the city to vote on what changes should be made. I also believe the citizens of Cloudbank are real people who are in some way hooked up to the simulation, possibly in a Matrix-style kind of fashion. And so the simulation is ran to see what happens to the city when the population is given more or less complete control over its development. The process are basically caretakers, and it's their job to carry out the will of the people, which they receive through the various polls. The results of the simulation thus far seems to be that people keep changing their mind about what they want, preventing any real progress from ever being made. The stagnation of the city is brought up in Royce Brackett's profile. The will of the people changed in cycles. Bridges would come down in favor of railways. Railways would give way to parks. New bridges would be built upon the parks, and so on. In other words, the will of the people has proven short-sighted. And as such, the development of Cloudbank is just going around in circles, with no real progress ever being made. And it was this stagnation that caused the Camerata to act. The Camerata's creed is, when everything changes, nothing changes. This seems to give voice to their frustration at the lack of meaningful development in Cloudbank. If there is one thing that becomes apparent from studying the profile of the various members, it's that they thought that they could somehow use the process and the transistor to change the course of history. Or rather, as I interpret it, they wanted Cloudbank to actually have a history. If you look at the profile for Asher Kendall, you'll see that he tried to study the history of the city, but he couldn't find any concrete information. All he could find was dead ends and contradictions, as well as facts that just simply didn't add up. I actually believe that this little tidbit could also give some support for the VR theory. What Asher found in the various archives was information from previous versions of the simulation. It would make sense then that the information doesn't add up, as it was based on a different version of the world. But I digress. He then met up with Grant, an administrator who'd seemed to become jaded with the fact that there was no real ideals behind any of the changes made to the city. As it says in his profile, he has basically fought for every social position at one point or another, always trying to please the majority. However, it does seem like the majority don't really know what they want. And so with the interchangeability of the city, as well as the voting system, they don't really have to stick with any decisions that they make. And so progress is short-sighted and no real history is ever being written. And so Grant wanted to steer the city in a unified direction, because as he puts it, if there was one person who knew what was best for the city, it would be him. And so he formed the Camerata with an engineer with a vision, Royce Brackett. Royce had tried to find more practical engineering solutions to the way the city was constructed. He wanted buildings that would be around longer and that didn't have to be demolished whenever the population changed their mind on what they wanted built where. These designs never went over well with the people, however. And so he joined Grant, and it was Royce's idea to use the process and the transistor to achieve their goals. The last member, Sybil Rice, never gets a stated reason as to why she joined the Camerata. Although I don't think it's too big of a stretch to think that she was also frustrated with the way the city was going, or rather not going. And it can't be denied that she played a vital part in their operation, being able to assess the targets that they needed to assimilate. And this is where the transistor and the cradle enter the picture. Much like the computer theorists, I believe that the cradle is the heart of the simulation, as well as the transistor being a component of the cradle. It's my theory that Royce discovered that the transistor can be used to rewrite the codes of the various programs running within the simulation. The program he was primarily concerned with was the process. If they could find a way to bend the will of the process, then they could set the city on the path that they desired. But in order to do this properly, they needed to know what the people actually desired. And in order to get this information, they needed to peek inside the minds of the few individuals who had managed to capture the hearts and minds of Cloudbank, as well as those with knowledge and insight on how the city functioned. And what better way to get at this information than converting it to data? And so they would track down their target and use the transistor's power to rewrite things within the simulation. They then remade their thoughts and their mind into data, which was then stored within the transistor. The information stored within the transistor will be based on the person's trace. I believe your trace is made based on the selections you made when you took the various polls. Think of it as a very elaborate personality test. So in order to assimilate someone into the transistor, you would first need to dial it into their specific trace. When the transistor then made contact with the actual trace, it would convert it into a different kind of data, which it would then store within itself. I believe the Camerata's end goal was to fill the transistor with traces of individuals who fully understood what the population actually wanted. They would then plug it back into the cradle and upload all of this information into the process. The process would then start shaping the city in a way that most people could be pleased with. Maybe not immediately, as most people were really used to being able to vote on everything, but in the long run, they would come to understand the benefits of this plan. The Camerata, of course, would watch over their work and make any adjustments that they saw fit. One of their last targets was the influential singer Red. As we know, things didn't go particularly well, but what actually happened when her assimilation was interrupted? While there are some variation on what caused everything to go wrong, pretty much everybody can agree on that it all started with Red's lover intercepting the transistor. As a side note, I'm gonna be referring to this mysterious lover as the Boxer from now on. Again, we never learn his name, but he is referred to as Boxer in the game's files. And given the tape around his hands and wrists, it goes to reason that he is, well, a boxer. So that's what we're gonna call him. Anyhow, his profile states that he has no selections on record. In other words, he never participated in a vote. This left his trace blank, so in the Cloudbank database, he basically doesn't exist. While we're never given an exact number, it stands to reason that there would be very, very few citizens who never participated in a single vote. I believe that this is what caused the transistor to glitch out completely. First off, the transistor would have been dialed in on red, preparing itself to take in her trace and transform it into data. However, it collided with someone else, which undoubtedly messed with the system. In addition, it collided with someone with a blank trace. This caused untold errors within the transistor. This caused the ownership, which had previously been assigned to Grant, to instead be transferred to Red. This would be because Red was the last person to be dialed in for a simulation. In other words, the weapon confused Grant's and Red's information. I'll be honest though, I do not have a solid theory as to why Red lost her voice in the process. The best I can come up with is that the transistor doesn't necessarily have to touch the person whose trace it's supposed to assimilate. The process starts before contact is made, although they would have to be connected in order to finish it. This would mean that parts of Red's trace was stolen before the boxer intervened, and among the things she lost was her voice. Still, not particularly solid, I'll admit. Anyhow, regarding the boxer, how did he get stuck as the voice of the transistor, and how can he still leave a function if he didn't have a proper trace? I don't necessarily think that traces and functions are connected, primarily because you can get the functions of people who are still alive, like several members of the Camerata. In other words, this is another kind of data which can be entered without the person in question necessarily having to be killed or integrated. The reason the boxer can speak through the transistor is because he could not be folded in with the other traces, leaving him closer to the, surface, I suppose. The interception also messed with the programs that Transistor and the Cradle communicate with. Primarily, you guessed it, the process. It's now left pretty much without direction, and without the Transistor, the Camerata can't reassume control. So in order to stop the process, the Transistor has to return to the Cradle, which would more or less reboot the entire thing. And with that, the plot of the game starts. I'd like to bring up one more little thing on this subject, and that is humans who are infected by the process. I believe that this is the process taking over whatever program is used to keep the citizens within the simulation, and that it could be difficult or downright dangerous to remove them before the corruption has been cleansed. One thing that I found absolutely fascinating is that about halfway through the game, the Camerata starts to take responsibility for everything they've done. I believe they genuinely regret what they did, or at the very least Grant did. Because even though the admission is signed in Asher's name, I believe that he did this because he thought that this is what Grant would have wanted. For those of you not in the know right now, Grant and Asher are married. This can be derived from some tidbits in both their profiles, as well as the fact that they share a last name, and they're not blood related. With Grant most likely suffering from process corruption, Asher takes it upon himself to try to explain to Red what they were trying to accomplish.
It was nothing personal, you know. You were valuable, handpicked. Unique, but one of many. All we needed was your point of view, to give the people what they didn't know they wanted. That's all we ever wanted, all Grant ever tried to achieve. The rest was merely incidental. What good could 4 individuals ever hope to accomplish in this city with only their own 4 voices? Well, we found our answer. You have it right there, in your hands.
They seem genuinely devastated about what happened, and it's this feeling of guilt, as well as the spreading corruption, that causes them to end their lives. The only Camerata member who doesn't submit to regret is Royce. I think he stuck it out because he wanted to see what he could do if he was given the power that would come with a returned transistor. But again, that's pure speculation. And now, for the last topic of this video, I want to talk briefly about the country. As far as I can tell, there seems to be 3 competing theories about what the country is. One, that it's a metaphor for the afterlife. One, that it is the reality within the transistor, and one, that it's simply a place outside of the city. I'm going to go for a combination of 1 and 3. The reason I don't believe it refers to the inside of the transistor, even though it definitely looks very country-esque, is that Asher in his suicide note seems to refer to the country and the inside of the transistor as 2 different things.
I couldn't stay to meet with you in person. Grant, he couldn't wait any longer. Why he would leave me? I'd sooner take an eternity in the transistor. But he was no longer seeing straight. Or perhaps he'd decided he'd seen enough. We knew the stakes of what we wanted to accomplish. And we knew that if we were to fail, we would do so together. As one. See you in the country.
The term also seemed familiar to everyday people, people who would not even be aware of the existence of the transistor. So I really don't think it refers to the realm within the transistor. As a subscriber of the VR theory, I think the country is just where you go when you disconnect from the simulation. This could be either through death in the simulation or if you just decide to leave the city. When the process started to spread, I think a lot of people just left the city and as such disconnected, whether they knew it or not. As such, it works both as a metaphor for the afterlife as well as leaving the city. I really don't think it's more complicated than that. Anyhow, this video has already gone on for long enough. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed these little ramblings and speculation, and I would honestly love to hear what you think on the various subjects. So please leave a comment with your theories on the various subjects that we discussed in this video, as well as others if you can think of them. If you enjoyed the video, then you're more than welcome to leave a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos from me, you can always subscribe. Thank you again so much for watching. Take care, and I hope to catch you later.